everyone, my name is Chelsea and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I have my January wrap-up. So starting in the month of January, I did a TBR game where we picked out 5 books for me to read in the month of January. Now, I did read more than 5 books, however, I did not read one of the books that I was supposed to read, mostly I think because of the genre it was. I was just not really into fantasy this month, and I will show you guys some of the stats and stuff that sort of explain that as well. But yeah, so I did end up reading 4 of the books that we picked out during the TBR game, and then I read some other ones, because I actually ended up reading a total of 11 books in January, and a total of 2,472 pages. Of those books, 2 were ebooks and 9 were physical books. I did split up how I got them versus format, because last year I was saying arc separately than if it was an ebook arc or a physical arc, that kind of thing. So I did have the 2 ebooks, but one of them was an arc. So if we go into how I got the book, one was an arc. One book I bought technically in the month of January, but this category will be for if I bought it this year, and then 9 of them were from my own TBR of books that I already owned. For my age ranges, 1 was young adult and 10 were adult titles. And then I don't usually do genres of what I read in these little stats videos for the wrap-ups. However, this is part of the reason I didn't end up finishing my January TBR. I read 9 sci-fi books in the month of January, 1 thriller and 1 fantasy, and the book that I did not read from my TBR was another fantasy book. I just don't think I was really in the mood for fantasy, because as you can see, even the books that were not on my TBR that I ended up reading were still sci-fi. I was just in a big sci-fi mood apparently, so I read a ton of that in January. And then going into the star ratings, I did have 1 DNF, 1 2-star read, 1 3-star read, 3 4-star reads, and 5 5-star reads. So as always, we're going to be going from my least favorite book of the month, or my DNFs, up to my favorite book of the month. So for the DNF, I actually did DNF The Brilliant Death by A.R. Capetta. This is one that I don't think was necessarily bad. I just don't think it was for me, especially at this time. This was the fantasy book that I read. I obviously didn't read very much into it. I think I gave it half an hour, 45 pages or so, and the entire time I was reading, I was just I'm not into this. I'm bored. I don't really want to read it. The concept sounded amazing. Basically, this is a fantasy world where our main character does have some magic. She is in this sort of crime mob mafia type of family, which is definitely not my thing. I think that was part of it. And she's the only one in her family that has magic, and they're basically having her use that magic to keep power. And then she comes across someone else that apparently does have magic, but they have a magic to change themselves. They can change their gender from a guy to a girl, that kind of thing. From my understanding, the author of this book is also either trans or gender fluid, non-binary. They're in that trans umbrella. And so I thought the concept was going to be amazing. However, I just don't think this was for me. It was very slow to start. In those first 45 pages that we were getting, we didn't really get to see the other character that the whole concept of this is about, with the changing of the genders. And because we were getting more of the political mafia mob family type of stuff, I was just really not into that, and so I don't think this is necessarily a bad book, and I'm trying to be a little bit better about DNFing books that I know for a fact are just not for me. I'm not going to be rating them on Goodreads as a bad rating. The DNFs that I do DNF because of bad things or offensive things, those will get low ratings, but for me, this was a DNF, not necessarily bad. I did put it on Goodreads because I like to track these kind of things. That I DNF'd it. It has just no star rating. On my paperwork here in my charts, the stats that I showed you, my DNFs show up as a 1 star, but that is because I don't really rate books that I do finish 1 star, hardly ever, and it's not capable of having the star ratings and DNFs together. So I just keep it as a 1 star so that it's consistent. But this is not necessarily a bad book. I'm sure people are going to like this if this is your thing, but I was just not into it. My 2-star, so actually the book that was the worst of the month for me technically, was Heart of the Sun by Pamela Sargent and George Zabrowski. So this is a Star Trek novel. This is an original series Star Trek novel. So the original series was in the 1960s. These books usually came out around the 70s and 80s, sometimes the 90s, and I've read a few of them. I have tons more that I need to read, but I've read a few of them, and they're usually cheesy, but they evoke that like Star Trek feeling that I loved of the original series. And so most of the time with these books I end up giving it 3, 4 stars. I've had occasionally a couple 5s. This was a 2. I did not really feel the Star Trek-ness of it. I was hoping it was going to get better, which is why I did push through and finish this, especially since it was only like 200 and something pages. However, I do feel like this also sort of put me in a reading slump near the end of the month because it took me multiple days to finish this because I just didn't want to keep picking it up. I probably should have DNF'd it, but I have never DNF'd a Star Trek book yet, so yeah, I think one of my biggest issues is the characters didn't feel like the characters that we know and love from Star Trek. Like, they didn't feel like they had much characterization. This book was also very, very slow to start. We had an emphasis on a different planet and different characters than our actual crew. Like, they were there trying to fix a computer malfunction, and I was just like, okay, the setup of the story was taking forever. And then if we look on the back of like the summary, it says, when an abandoned space habitat is found within a distant asteroid belt, the Starship Enterprise is sent to investigate. Captain Kirk and his crew discover an artificial world full of technological marvels and unexpected dangers. But wonder and curiosity give way to fear when the habitat's shifting orbit sends it on a collision course with an inhabited planet within the same solar system. This is actually not true. So like, they find this asteroid, meteoroid, they don't know it's a habitat, and they see it traveling toward the sun in this inhabited solar system. It is never on a collision course with another inhabited planet. They don't know that it's a space habitat for like so long, and when it says it's full of technological marvels and unexpected dangers, there's nothing in it. Like, yes, I guess some of it is like, oh, advanced technology, but there are no technological marvels that people can see whatsoever. They actually don't even realize what's going on with this until more than halfway through the book. I feel like the summary lied to me. This was just not good. The writing style was okay, but the actual story was nothing like what I was expecting, and the characters weren't Star Trek enough. Like, it could have been a completely different story. So, yeah, 2 stars because it was very, very much disappointing and not at all what I was expecting for a Star Trek novel. At number 3, I have a sort of surprise here because I really thought I was going to DNF this before I even had it on my TBR, but it's The Secret Next Door by Rebecca Taylor. This was a book that came in an unplugged book box after we had like multiple boxes of thriller books. This is a domestic thriller. I want to specify that because of the fact that like it wasn't very thrilling. I gave it a 3 stars because it was okay. I am never going to think about this book again or remember this book again, but it wasn't necessarily bad if you're looking for domestic thriller type of stuff. Basically, this follows a couple different main characters, but the main one is a family that is new in town. This is a very small town, and they're having some issues. There's like the rich population and the poorer population, or I guess I should say middle class population, because like nobody's actually poor here. And they're like trying to get along with the people in the town, but they're finding it hard because they are new. We also have another character who is like really high up in the town, very rich, and while we are having these sort of like domestic squabbles going on, there is a point where they find a kid's body at the lake. I think they're like between 12 and 15, something like that. And it doesn't seem like that is a major plot point, like at all, because the domestic part of this domestic thriller is what is really the focus of this book. The squabbles around town, that kind of thing. One thing that this made me think of was Broadchurch. I don't know if you've seen Broadchurch or anything like that, but it is a TV show series that I have not finished, but I've watched at least the first season, I think a little bit past that, and the first season of Broadchurch is what this made me think of. But Broadchurch is better. There is a little bit difference in the characters and how, like, in Broadchurch, one of our main characters is like a police officer, and that is not the case here, but there were a lot of story beats that felt very, very similar, and so I was just like, this is what it's making me feel like. However, the murder in Broadchurch is the whole point that the story focuses around, where I felt like this one was put on the back burner. We do eventually get a payoff at the end, but again, it felt very just sort of like, here's who did it? Like, it didn't feel like it mattered too much to the story. I probably should have DNF'd this, like I thought I was going to, but it was very, very quick to read. I think this was the quickest book that I read in the month, and so I literally sat down for like, again, maybe like half hour, 40 minutes or so, got to like page 80 something, and when we got there, the murder had happened, and so I was like, okay, I guess I'm gonna read this and figure out what is going on. But it was just okay. Now, I have 3 4-star reads. However, they are all parts of series where I read other books that were 5-star reads during the month. So I think what I'm just gonna do is pick the like lower rated 4 and 5 stars and talk about that series first, and then talk about the higher rated 4 and 5 stars. So the first series I have here is going to be the Villains series by V.E. Schwab. The first book I read is obviously going to be Vicious. I did give this book 5 out of 5 stars. This is a like anti-hero, superhero type of origin story. We have multiple timelines and 2 main characters basically, who I think we start in more of the present day, but they have the POVs of them going back like 10 years ago when they're in college and actually trying to become extraordinary, which is what in this world the like superhero type of people with powers are called. And I absolutely loved this. I love the dynamic between those 2 characters because both characters are morally gray, but there is one that you're obviously rooting for more than the other, even though nobody is actually like a hero. I love the concept of how they got their powers. This was very, very well done. I absolutely love V.E. Schwab's writing style, so of course I had to pick this up, and I'm so glad I did. This was phenomenal. And then I also read the newest collection of comics that is technically book 1.5. So like this goes in between, bridges some of the gap between book 1 and 2. It follows different characters than the first 2 books. So actually I don't think this is the best thing to read in between. I actually did read Vicious and then Extraordinary and then Vengeful, but this didn't have any actual payoff in book 2. I liked this. I actually did give it 5 stars because I loved the characters in here, and I again liked knowing how they got their powers and what their powers were, but I didn't feel like it actually needed to be in between the first 2 books. Like I was hoping for more of a connection of like why we saw this, because the main characters from this didn't show up in Vengeful. Like they just didn't show up at all. So while I did absolutely love this, the art style was really, really well done, and the stories were pretty cool, it didn't need to be read in between the books, so this is like a supplement. I think if you're going to be reading this series, you read Vicious, you read Vengeful. You don't have to read this, but if you want to, it's good. And then the 4-star from the series was Vengeful. So this one, I think my biggest issue with this is that this book opens up the main characters so much more. We basically are following Victor and Eli in book 1, so two characters. This one ends up giving us like 2 or 3 more main characters to follow, and so because of that, the time that we were spent with like the leftover people from the first book was cut way down. They had issues still going on, there was still a power struggle with certain things, but we didn't really get to see that as much. We were definitely given too many characters to open it up for, and like I did again like seeing how they got their powers and that kind of thing, but I don't know, the close-knit aspect that I felt between the characters of the first book, even though they're sort of fighting against each other, I didn't feel that as much in here. This is actually one of the lower 4 stars for me, just because it was still well written, but I don't know, I didn't feel as connected to the new characters. Also, this one does again have time jumps, so we have stuff that's like currently happening, we have stuff from like 14 years ago, stuff from a couple years ago, and it jumps back and forth. It's not going to be like in a timeline order, and because we have so many more people to follow, we're jumping in timelines for multiple people. It was a little bit harder to read. Then the next series that I read that also had some 4 and 5 stars is going to be the Rest of Saga. So if you've been watching my channel for the last month or so, you know that I have been doing a read-along with Ashley from Bookish Realm, Isabel from Happy for Now, Bree from Locked Book Cushion, and Erica from The Broken Spine, where we were rereading or reading for the first time some of these volumes. Volumes 1 through 9 of Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. And so we did some live shows in December. I think in November and December, somewhere around there, we read volumes 1 through 6. And then in January, we read 7, 8, 9, and issue 55, which just came out on Wednesday, January 26th. And so, yeah, that is what we've been doing. I did end up giving volume 7 4 stars because this is a series that I can't get into too much because of how far into the series we are, but it is very mature, very adult, very graphic, very dark, but there are points of humor and stuff in it. We're following these two characters who are technically from opposite sides of a war. This is a sci-fi fantasy because one of the sides of the war is very technological focused. They are still characters that have wings and stuff, so it's pretty fantastical that way, but it is definitely more sci-fi for them. And then they're also fighting a race of characters with horns who have like full-on magic, and they end up coming together because they fell in love with each other and they have a baby, and they're trying to survive while other people do not want them to survive. This volume 7 was quite dark, and I did say before that this whole series is quite dark, and it is very true, but we have moments of brevity and like humor and stuff like that, and I feel like volume 7 did not have that. It was just hard hit after hard hit, and so for me, this was a 4 stars. Moving into volumes 8 and 9, again, they are still very dark and mature and bad things happen, but we did have more like full-on emotions for it, both happy and sad, and there was some more humor with this. So I absolutely loved volumes 8 and 9. It hit me in my feels. I cried at this one. I knew that was gonna happen. I had not read this previously because I knew it was going to be sad. People called this book devastating, and I had picked them up when they were coming out as these volumes, but right after volume 9, that's when Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples went on their hiatus, and so I just kept putting it off because I knew it was going to be very, very sad and horrible to read if you didn't have more to continue with. I still absolutely love this, 5 out of 5 stars, but I cried. So then we also read issue 55 because that just came out. This one I also gave 4 stars, mostly because it is an issue. This was a like double issue extended edition sort of thing, so I think it was like 47 pages, where I think some standard issues are usually between 20 and 30-ish. But because we ended volume 9 where we did, they did like a time jump of a few years, and we didn't really get any good information about what had previously happened in this issue. I'm curious about it. It definitely still feels like the saga we know and love. Like, I absolutely loved it. Except for the fact that I was confused by like, how did we get from here to here? And I do feel like sometimes I rate issues a little bit lower than volumes because you don't get as much information. It's more like a snapshot, and we will get more in issue 56. But I was just sort of hoping for a little bit more of a continuity sort of thing. But I still absolutely loved it. And then the last book that I have to talk about today, and my favorite book of the month, obviously 5 out of 5 stars, is Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. So this is a book that I read as an e-arc, and actually I think it was originally supposed to come out in January, but it did get moved back to the beginning of February, so this will be coming out in about a week, I want to say. Probably a little bit less than a week, but I absolutely love this. So this is billed as The Shining meets Titanic, and when I say Titanic, not the movie Titanic, it is not like a romantic thing with a disaster, like the original Titanic, the actual ship. I also felt some comparison to like The Sixth Sense as well, just in some of the characterizations of one of the characters, but let me tell you, this is a sci-fi horror. I will say I think this is a more manageable horror for people that are maybe more into the sci-fi genre than the horror genre. There were still some like really spooky parts and really creepy parts and some bloody gory parts, but it was put in between the like sci-fi aspect, and I really liked how the story was written. Like, I did not want to put this down. I think I read it in just like a couple days because I was hooked. I tried not to read it right before bed just because I didn't know exactly how much horror we were going to get into, but I freaking loved this book. I love the characterization. I love the sci-fi aspect, even though it's not like in your face, a whole bunch of science sort of thing. The writing style was phenomenal. I just absolutely love this. I'm definitely gonna need a physical copy for my shelves because this was my favorite book of January. It was the first book I read in January, actually. Wasn't even on my TBR, but I read it. I absolutely loved it. And so yeah, if you're looking for sci-fi horror, or you like the Titanic, or The Shining, or Sixth Sense, I definitely think this is going to be up your alley. But like I said, also, if you're more into the sci-fi stuff, or you're wanting to start getting into horror, like you haven't really done that yet, and you're a little scared of some of the other horror books that are out, this does have some horror elements, but I feel like it is more easily digestible for newbies, and I absolutely loved it. And so that is going to be everything that I read in January. Again, not too bad. 11 books, I guess technically 10 if you don't count the DNF, but I usually just have it on my list that way. And so yeah, I also have 5 books for my TBR game for February that hopefully I will get to all of them. I will leave it linked down below in case you haven't seen it yet. But that is going to be it for me today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up to let me know. Subscribe to this channel if you would like to see more videos. I do have videos up Tuesdays and Thursdays, so I will see you then. Bye!